That's always good. But I'll start with fluorescents. They're really cheap to buy. They're cheap to run. And when I have my fluorescent tubes, the first thing I'll do when I'm trying to get my seedlings up and germinated, providing my room is the right temperature, and we're going to talk more about this in germination a few slides up, but I keep those fluorescent lights that they don't get hot. I keep it like this close to the plant, because otherwise if you've got too much space from light to plant, we call it getting leggy. So your plant is just reaching for that light source, and you'll get a really thin stalk that is weak and is reaching for the light. But if it's really close, like that close, like sometimes I have to adjust it. Like I just use a coffee cup like this and prop the lights on top of it on a table. And oftentimes the plants start even growing and touching the lights. And then I have to put the lights up just an inch. But the closer you have your lights with the fluorescents, the better. You'll get a nice, strong, thick stalk. Halogen, which is they're 800 watts. They were expensive. I don't know if they've come down in price. They're good in that they provide more of a full spectrum light. So the fluorescents don't provide a full spectrum. And I'll talk a little bit more about sun scalding later on. But if you don't have a full spectrum light, either halogens or the LEDs, then you will be susceptible to sun scalding. Which is it's like you going out into the sun without suntan lotion on because you've never been exposed to the sun, or you don't have a good base for your tan. So yeah, the halogens are good in that it's 800 watts of usage, so they're hard on your electricity bill. But the good thing about halogens is that they create a lot of heat. So then you might not necessarily have to bring in supplemental heat to heat your room to help with germination. Like your optimum germination is like 70 on the low end to like 85 on the high end. I wouldn't want to go too much higher than that. With hot crops, you can go higher. We'll talk more about seeds in a bit. So that's the benefits of having a halogen, is that it will warm up your room. And the LEDs, they're coming down in price, and a lot of them are full spectrum, and they're really low energy usage. Like I have LED grow light right here. These are more expensive ones. It's just a big square, and it's got fans on the back. And then we have, these were from a cannabis grow op, and we were given them because they were getting other ones, but there's a bloom setting and there's a growth setting. So you want everything on the growth, if that's not obvious when you're first starting your seedlings. And if you were doing any indoor stuff, but I believe we're talking more outdoor, the bloom means that it's going to give the kind of light that is going to trigger the plants into producing a flower. So yeah, that's kind of it on lighting. I didn't want to spend too much time on that. And we're going to visit a few of those things in another slide. Slide 2, growing mediums. So the growing mediums you have are potting mix, seeding mix, and potting soil. And depending on what you get, there's a lot of different blends out there. I've been a certified organic farmer for my whole career. I didn't know how to plant a single seed before this. I think I soaked a lima bean in grade 4 and it sprouted, and we had to put it in our garden at home, and in a mason jar and all that. And I knew nothing when I started farming about 20 years ago. OMRI listed, being a certified organic farmer, OMRI listed stuff is generally accepted by all of our certifiers, EcoCert and ProCert and all that kind of stuff. So I tend to go with that because I'm not into chemicals and all that. I think biology is a much better approach than chemistry when it comes to farming and life itself, because we're biological living beings. The soil is a biological living being, and I would rather put nutrients available to me from biological breakdown than a chemical breakdown. And most chemical stuff has warning and hazardous labels on it, which tells me it's not good for me. So I don't want it in that diluted form. So the different growing medium, potting mix is a nice light and fluffy kind of mix, and it usually has perlite or vermiculite and peat moss in it. So that is going to be nice and light and allow for germination, for your seeds to germinate and push through the top of the soil. If you have a potting soil that has some more organic like soil in it, and they can get, when you water, they can start to, when the water hits it, they can start to cinch down and get a little more compact, and it'll be harder for your seeds to germinate. With seeding mix, it's usually, seeding mix doesn't have any added fertility in it. It doesn't have any of the NPK with the macronutrients or the micronutrients. It is purely a medium so that when you water, things are just going to come up right away with the least resistance. And then I usually will do some compost teas. We're going to talk fertility in a little bit too. And then, yeah, so potting mix is generally what I use. I don't really use the seeding mix. With the potting mix, if it has some nutrient in it, or if it's cut with compost or anything like that, that can inhibit some germination, which is why more professional or larger scale growers will use the seeding mix to get things up. And then we call it potting on. We'll take those little seedlings and put them in the right size cells that we're going to use for them to grow. There are a few of the things to look for in the potting mix. I haven't had like a lot of failures using the potting mix. The stuff that I've been buying lately has been a company called Fafard, F-A-R-D, and they're a really good one. And they have this coconut fiber in it, and this was a real game changer for me. So the peat moss is usually in there. They put these coconut fibers, which really retains the moisture. So I was having to water a lot less. So I could water and almost go 24 hours without watering, even when the greenhouse is getting up to like 25 degrees or 30 degrees or under the halogen light. I had the halogen lights to start. Yeah. Sorry, I'm kind of reading the chat here as I go too. Maybe I shouldn't be doing that to get through this, but yeah, peat harvesting, not the best. The coconut fibers is better. That's a really great point. Peat is not a renewable resource. I mean, it is, but it's not at the scale that we use it. So yeah, that's definitely a good point. And please throw out all those points to me, because at this point on this planet, we need to be the least impactful and the most beneficial to this earth as we can. So yeah, I would just look at the nutrients that are added into things. Generally, I'll just go over it really quick. If it's a chicken compost or turkey compost, I will go about 8-to-1, 8 soil mix or potting mix or seeding mix or whatever to 1 part compost. With sheep, I would probably go 5-to-1. With cow, I'd probably go 3-to-1. So 3, and it's got to be compost, not like raw manure, if that's not obvious. Yeah, that's generally what I do. And we'll talk a little bit more about the fertility in a little bit. And I'm going to go on to the third slide here, which is selecting seeds. So being a certified organic farmer too, I have to have 5 different sources. I should mention that we're not certified organic down here in Mcquesten, but doing everything organically by the book. But we have for certification, it's 5 different sources. What you see there is Baker's Creek. Johnny's is a real great company in the US. High Mowing is the largest farm-based seed company. They have 20 acres of seed in production, and what they did was they contacted all these seed growers and got them to transition from conventional to certified organic. They're a really amazing company, and they've sued the American government for genetic modification and stuff. They're awesome people. Highly recommend them. And then William Dam is our local seed supplier. They're up in Flamborough. They import most of their stuff. The problem in this country is that we do not have enough seed farmers to feed our population. It's about food security. So we need more people saving seed for sure. We don't have enough vegetable seed in this country. When I'm looking at what I'm going to buy, open pollinated versus hybrid. So open pollinated means these are the traditional varieties that we've had that naturally pollinate without anything, just by having this tomato plant and this tomato plant beside each other, and then they crossbreed and they pollinate. And then if you're a seed breeder, you would breed that for generations until you get a stable. Because when you have a hybrid, if you're going to try and save seed from it, what happens is there's a mother line and a father line, the parent line, and when you breed them together, they revert back to one or the other. So sometimes a hybrid, like say, what's that one? Yellow zucchini patty pans, they're hybrid. So there is open pollinated ones, but most of the yellow patty pans are hybrid. So it might be like a hard kind of gourd type plant, but that gourd plant produces abundant amounts of gourds. And then you might have this zucchini plant, that's the other parent line, that is tender and tastes nice, but it doesn't produce much. And then when you put them together, all of a sudden you got this hybrid vigor, and you've got a plant that doesn't have that hard gourd shell anymore, but produces like the gourd, but then tastes like the zucchini. So that's what a hybrid seed is. And when you save the seed, you're going to get one or the other usually. And with a lot of hybrid seeds too, there's this plant variety protection and stuff, and it's illegal for you to save seed. Save seed, guys. It's really important. But that is part of trade relation of intellectual property. I won't get into any heavy world politics about agriculture. The other thing I'm looking at is the germination rates. Most companies, when they send you a seed packet, it'll have the germination rates on the bottom, 80%, 89%, and it'll have the time it was tested. So sometimes they're testing in January, February, sometimes they're testing in September, October, whenever they harvested that seed and they did their germination test. I should note here too that if you get seeds, you can put them all in the freezer. That's if it says 80% germination rate, 10 years from now, as long as your freezer was kept at your -17 or whatever your freezer's at, it should still be 80% true when it comes out of there. So I keep a lot of my seeds in the freezer. And the days to maturity, some things are 10, 15 days faster than other varieties. So when I'm looking at varieties, there's like, you know, a 60-day Moskvich Russian tomato that's ready to go. 60 days, nice sized tomato. And then you've got Brandywines and other tomatoes that might be like 90 to 100 days. So it's important if you're trying to keep a constant harvest happening all season long to look at those days of maturity to know, especially if you're planning and you're going to take a plant out and then put something else in because you're trying to maximize your space. It's important to kind of plan for that by looking at those days to maturity. Yeah, I just had another thought for fertility, but we'll move to the next slide there. And I lost the thought, but I'm sure I'll remember. So we got field prep and crop planning calendars. So to start off with, I plant by the biodynamic calendar. So I won't go into biodynamics too crazy, but the gist of it is, guy Rudolf Steiner started doing this. We've been planting by the moon and the lunar cycles from the hundreds and hundreds of years. The Biodynamic Society, they use the NASA star charts. So it's kind of like when yes, I do keep my seeds in the freezer during the off season. When the full moon is out, like we're governed by the moon, women's cycles are often governed by the moon. When the full moon is out, the tides are reversed. So there's these energy waves, cosmic energy that is going over the land always. And I mean, the most stark example is when the moon is out, the tides are reversed. So with the biodynamic calendar, they have figured out different times for planting. So there's a dark periods where the cosmic forces are not good. In those days, we try to, within reason, work on our equipment, sharpen our hose, do stuff that's not field work. And then there's 4 different times, 4 different cycles. So there's the rooting cycle. So I usually try to do either germinating seeding stuff on rooting days or work on my root crops. So your turnips, your rutabagas, your carrots, your beets, your garlic, your onions, that kind of stuff. And then there is the flowering crops. There's flowering periods. So flowering would be your anything that's going to flower, your cauliflower, your broccoli, your herbs and flowers that you're doing for aesthetic reasons and for companion planting. I try to work on those. And then you've got your fruiting period, which is all your fruiting plants. So your tomatoes, your trees, your zucchinis, cucumbers, all those kinds of things. And then you have, what am I missing? Your leaf period. So that's your cabbages and anything that's leafy, your salad mix, all that kind of stuff. And I should note that the reason when I talk about these things, I'm just looking at what works. And if I have people that are doing all these tests and studies and proving stuff, I mean, of course I do things myself too. But what they would do is plant a radish on a rooting day and then say that at 12 noon, it turns into a leaf day. So they've planted in the morning during that rooting period, that radish, and then they plant it in the later, like 6 hours later when it's a leaf period, that same radish, and then they grow it at 28 days to maturity. They pull the radishes and they would outline the size of the root on the radish. And more often than not, the root on the planted 6 hours earlier in the rooting period is bigger, and they would trace it and did an average size. And then the leaves on those radishes, when they traced the leaf, on average, the leaf was bigger on the 6 hours later during that leaf period than it was for the root one that got planted in the root period. And I mean, if you can just do this yourself. Radishes are a great example to use because they're quick, they're 28 days, but check it out. I don't know. I can't dismiss that. But beyond that, if you get this is from a place called Earth Haven that I got mine. There's plenty of biodynamic calendars and different companies that put theirs out. This is a Canadian-based one, and they can make their own. But the beautiful thing about it, I like, so it's color-coded. You've got red, I think, is fruit, and green is leaf, and that might be flower. And then you've got your dark periods here you can see. But the beautiful thing for me, from a planning perspective, is that I'm going to plan to work on my fruit crops on this day. So I'm going to plant all my fruiting stuff on that day. I'm going to plant all my leaf stuff on this day. And so it kind of makes it easy for me to plan. Of course, we have to do things within the cycle of nature. If it's a hot day or, I work and I got a bunch of things going on, I'm going to get things in when I can. But this is really helpful. It just kind of, it thinks for you a little bit. Yeah, so that's really good. And then, I mean, there's all kinds of other useful information in here too on most of these calendars. Yeah, it's too much to discredit, I would say, because there's bodies of evidence.
Kevin, for that, can later on, I'm more than happy to provide the title of that in our follow-up email.
Sure, that's great. The other way that I I'll just talk about crop planning quick, and then I'll get to field prep. When I'm planning my crops, so you want to have, there's another slide coming up with timing and timelines, but I'll just take a normal calendar and I'll know your seedlings, you generally want to get them out 4 to 6 weeks. You don't want them in those, in your seedling trays for too long. But what I do is I work back. So if I want my radishes on June the 1st, then I know they're 28 days. I work 28 days back to when I need to seed it. And then say that's, we'll do radish. So say that's going to be sometime at the end of March, April, somewhere in here. I'll work back to say this week where it's the 15th, and I'll write seed radish. And then from there, I'll work back another 2 or 3 weeks, depending on what my field and what my beds look like. And I'll go back 3 weeks to start doing the field prep. So whether you're using tarps or you're going to use a rototiller or just you're using hand trowels and that kind of stuff, hose, wheel hose, whatever you're using, I'll rough up the soil to make sure the weeds are gone, or so that there's a chance for like about 3 weeks of any digestion that your field needs to do in order to be ready to accept a seed or a transplant or whatever. So generally I go back 3 weeks, and you will know where you're planting if you have to go back further. If you've got a stand of, 8-inch winter rye or something like that, you might want to work that in a little bit earlier. And when you work in stuff like that, the nitrogen is going to be bound when you have something live like that starting to break down in the soil. The nitrogen isn't really ready to be released to the plants until that breaks down a bit. So yeah, that's how I generally work with my farm calendars. Is I'll go back 3 weeks minimum, sometimes 5. And when I'm doing my field prep in that, I'm only ever wanting to work this much of the soil. Like the deeper you go, the more you're breaking up all those fungal strands and all the good stuff that all the little pathways that the bugs have come up and down, and the worms and all that, because they're transferring nutrients from down low to bringing them up to the surface when they come up. And so the more you break that up, the harder it is for them to work back. It might take, if you go like this deep, then they got to work through all that soil to make their little pathways back up. So I try to do minimal tillage as I can. Tarps are a really great thing for that. There's landscaping fabric, and then there's just silage, black plastic tarps. I never used them for years because of environmental reasons. I didn't want them, but I have embraced them recently because I do not want to disturb the soil. And with the soil food web, we know that, it's like one of the worst things you can do. Of course, we have to, and we have to work in the systems that we have, but yeah, I generally try not to. I should just say real quick, I'll show you on the picture there, that's Cassie, there's compost, and she's spreading it out, and then we'll just try to incorporate it a little bit under the earth. One thing that we do use in our fields, if you have heavy clay at home, you can use a pitchfork, you can use a shovel. This is called a broad fork. These tines here are about 18 inches. They go deep. I slam it in the ground like this, and then I go back and forth rocking it to get it as deep as I can. And then I don't pop and flip the soil. I just kind of loosen it and pop it so that I've made oxygen available down low. So sometimes I use an 18-inch, tree planting shovel, and use what you have, like just a pitchfork, but don't flip the soil upside down, because then everything is out of whack. So all that microorganisms and all the fungi and all that, now you've exposed, that was working down low here. If you flip it up, it's exposed to the wind, the air, the sun, all that, and it will kill what was there, and it has to regrow. And I should note too, most of the fungal activity and all that stuff is happening at a greater pace, like the fastest, especially in Canada, because we have these cold winters. When it's cold, that's when that fungus is really growing. Yeah, I think that's about all I wanted to say. Of course, it's good to put cover crops in. You really want to protect your soil as much as you can. So germination. There's a lot of different ways to germinate your plants. With my eggplants and peppers, I often just do them on plates. So you can have a heating mat. If you have a cold house, or you just need some heat, or especially with the hot crops, which are like squash, cucumbers, beans, eggplant, peppers, tomatoes, those kinds of things. We call them hot crops because they like to be 80 degrees ish Fahrenheit. I don't know, what is that, 20 Celsius, so mixed up Canadians. They want that to germinate, and there's lots of charts out there you can find which will tell you the optimum germination. Like carrots will germinate in 42 days at 1 degree Celsius. Of course, that's not ideal, but that's kind of just to give you an idea. Everything is different, but the hot crops want to be hotter, so you can put a little heat tray underneath. It's just like a little thin piece of plastic that has a metal cord in it. You plug it into the wall, and I'll just put a plate on there with a paper towel. I put my seeds down on the paper towel. I stick another paper towel over top of it. Then I water it so it's wet. And then I put another plate on top of it. And I put that on my little heating mat and just gauge the temperature. And so I'll germinate those until they have a little sprout. And then I'll put them in my whatever seed trays I'm going to be using. So that's one way to do. And then that way too, I don't have any wasted space. So if I have a tray of 50, I know every single seed I put in there germinated. So then I'm not going to have a wasted cell. So that's like just a way to really conserve my space and ensure that I'm only using seeds that germinate. The other way you can do it is you want to warm up your soil mix in that. So I would just put my seeds in my little trays. So I fill up my trays. Don't push them down too hard. You want a little bit of compaction, but not, really gentle. And then I really don't bury the seed too much. The general rule is you go 1.5 deeper than the size of the seed. But to give you an idea, brassicas, so your cauliflowers, rutabagas, turnips, cabbages, it's the biggest family that we have in the vegetable world. They're just like little tiny ball bearings, little round seeds. My friends at Simpler Time, they used to never even cover their brassica seeds. They just drop them in and then water because they're so small, and they figure when they water, the bit of soil around them is going to move on top of them. And as long as they keep that moist, things are going to germinate. Some people will water and put a plastic like saran wrap or whatever over top so that they don't have to keep on watering throughout the day, and keep it in the shade. That's another way to do it. I just check constantly to see where things are at. When I see the first thing pop up, I'll take that plastic cover off or whatever. Yeah, and having that soil temperature in a warm enough space is probably the biggest detriment. I planted whole trays of watermelons, and they were at like 70, and they never came up because they want to be hotter. So that's one thing you have to really know and look after. So I'll just set up tarps and stuff, or I'll put things underneath the table, and then I'll just stick a tablecloth over top of the tarp and have like a little space heater or something like that. Really simple. I mean, of course, be safe. Don't run space heaters on extension cords. I'll let you guys figure out your safety. Let's see. And then, of course, I talked about it earlier, potting mix versus potting soil versus seeding mix. Seeding mix is probably the best. Potting mix, as long as there's not too much nutrient in it. I've used it with great success over the years, and I generally don't buy seeding mix. That's just my preference, but seeding mix is totally fine. All right, so I'll go on to timing and timelines. I've got about another 10 minutes, and I got another 4 slides to get through. So again, for timing and timelines, look at your maturity dates, so you know how long a plant is going to need. Plan your seedlings with your timelines, like 4 to 6 weeks generally is what you want your vegetables in a seeding tray. So they get root bound if it's too long, which means when the roots go in, they will start to go circular at the bottom when they've run out of room to spread out in your pot. However big it is, and then they get root bound. And so the longer they're in there, they'll start to circle around. And sometimes when I'm transplanting, I'll just nip that growth off the bottom a little bit, so that the roots have a chance to grow down straight instead of bind into each other. So that's the other thing when you're looking at your timelines. You want to get things out 4 to 6 weeks, which you want to go back 3 weeks from when you plan on transplanting to make sure that you've got your beds ready. Some stuff like salad mix and like some bok choys or pak choys and Asian greens are cut and come again. So you can cut them like right where the leaves are all coming out from the center. You want to go just above that growth node where the new leaves are coming, and you cut it, and then they're going to come back. So that's another thing you want to look at. I generally only plan on 3 harvests off of like salad mix or Mizuna greens or any of those Asian greens. And the lettuce mixes, because the more you cut and they come back, the second, third cut, once after the third cut, it just starts to get really bitter, and then they're going to want to go to seed. Of course, there's things like Swiss chard and kale that you can harvest all season long, Brussels sprouts, things like that. So you're going to want to do a little bit of research to know if it's going to be something that gives the entire season long, or it's just something that is a one-off, like a broccoli or cauliflower. Broccoli, you can cut it and you'll get these little side shoots, but they end up being like this big and not really worth your time harvesting. Well, for me, to make money, but for you as a home gardener, a lot of broccoli varieties, and look at, just read the seed descriptions. It'll tell you if it's going to be one of those ones that's going to keep on giving, and you get these little florets that are great for freezing, or just great. You can go out and grab a handful, every 2-3 days, and keep that going all season. You can really keep those things going for a long time. Some other things too, like I will prune a lot, like eggplants and peppers, when they get up to the six leaves. So when the stalk's about 4 to 6 inches tall, and you've got 6 different leaves and starting to stem out, you can pinch the top growth node off, and it makes the plant become a bush. So if you're really tight on space, or just in general, it's a good thing to find out those crops or those vegetables that you can prune. And I just take that top growth node off, and it forces the plant to bush. So okra, like you can do this with tomatoes too, even, but there's zucchini, or not zucchinis, cucumbers, and you can kind of manipulate the plant a bit to be more productive, because the growth gets exponential. So instead of it just growing really tall, when I take that growth node off, now it really invigorates the plant to put off more side branches, and then you get this bush. And you can just do one plant or a couple of plants if you're not confident in your knowledge, and then just do a test. So do 2 plants and then leave the rest of them to grow high normally, and then check out what happens. And I'm going to get to that soil, heavy clay soil, which is what we work like concrete here when we started. It's amazing to see the tilth and what we've done with the soil over the years. The other thing with timing and timelines, and this is really, really, really important, pay attention to this one, is available light in the fall versus the spring. So in the spring, you have up to even 16 hours on some days when we're in Canada. So we have a longer light hours during, the solstices on June 20th. And I try to have all my hot crops in by then. June 1st is generally when we try to get it out, or the May 2-4 weekend, depending on where you are. We're Lower Bowl, Hamilton, so it's a little warmer here. And anywhere south of Hamilton, May 2-4 is a good date to go by. And I just look at that long range forecast, 14 days, if it's going to be cold or not. Anything under 5. Your seedlings generally don't want to go below 5 degrees. Some of the cold crops, your cabbages and some of the Asian greens and that, they can go colder, kale, Swiss chard. But all your hot crops, they want to be at minimum 5 and higher, because it messes up with your cycle. I put tomatoes out that got a little bit of frost on them, or went below that and transplanted them out, and they produced fruit 15-20 days after the rest of the crop that was kept at an optimum temperature. So the available light in the fall is especially important. So you might have a 90-day cabbage, but you can't plant that, say, August 1st, hoping you're going to get that 90-day in August, September, October, because of the available light. So that really slows the growth down. So I want to get it in sometime in July. Second week of July is generally the latest I try to get my cabbages that are 90 to 100 days in. And with that, it's from a seedling already. So the real important times for those fall timelines to look at is starting stuff June 1st, when you're rushing to get all your tomatoes and hot peppers and your okra and your whatever you're putting out, your cucumbers, all that kind of stuff, June 1st. You should be starting your seedling trays for your fall stuff, especially the 90 to 100 days, then planning on getting them out July 1st. So the first week of June and the first week of July are huge dates for starting seedlings and for transplanting. And if it says 100 days or 90 days on it, and you get it in before July, you're laughing, but you should be trying to get things in July because of that fall. And sometimes in the fall, you'll have a month where you get like maybe 4 hours of sun a week just because it's overcast, and it really messes things up. 5 degrees, I would say air temperature. Yeah. The soil temperature might be colder too, but yeah, generally 5 or on both of those it's good to have it above that 5. I am looking at some of the questions there. Yeah, with broccoli and cabbage and cauliflower, that kind of stuff. If it's a shorter day one, again, you got to look at these days of maturity. You can go a little bit later. I'm going to try and get through this really quick. Slide 7 here, we have trays and containers. I like to start things in 50s or bigger. The bigger the tray you have that you're using, the bigger your seedling's going to get, the more room it has for the roots. So if you do get into a really late spring, that it's too cold to get your stuff out, you have that buffer of an extra week because you have a bigger cell to work in. So we work in ones like this a lot. You have one like this, like I'll try and do as a market gardener, I'll try to do populations of 50 or 100 like this for my tomatoes, peppers, all that, because then I got a bigger seedling that's going to produce sooner, and then keep the rest of my stuff in 50s or 38s or whatever. And you know, I mean, if you have stuff like this, you're a home gardener and you have the soil, that's just a lot of potting mix to put in these things. That's something else you got to think of. Yeah, the bigger and stronger and more vigorous it's going to be when you go for transplant. One other thing we do here, if you're really tight on space, I love these things. I laughed when I saw them when I first got to this farm that I manage. These are called 288s, just meaning there's 288. They're not very deep, but that allows me to do thousands of things. So I can put these, I can fill them with potting mix or seedling mix or whatever, and then I can start all 280. I can start thousands of things in a very small space. You can transplant out before that 4 to 6 week point. It's just ideal for it to be 4 to 6 weeks. So another way to get cold frames, people have little pane glasses. They lean against their house. That acts like a little greenhouse. And if you have it airtight, or you just have like a little frame leaning like this on the side of your house, and you put plastic over it, you can put a little space heater on either end of it to keep things warm overnight, even when it's cold outside. Just you got to look at when the sun comes out in the morning. If it's there for a long time, you want to pull that up because it will get like 50 degrees, sometimes 40 degrees in there, and you'll kill your seedlings. But cold frames and little greenhouses are ideal. Giving your plants natural sunlight is really great too. Slide 8 is watering. How much? During the season, 1 to 2 inches of water. If you can get 1 inch of water to everything, that is great. You're going to have a good, healthy, strong plant if the fertility is there. Some of the soil mixes, you'll get some soil compaction. So if you have a soil mix as opposed to a potting mix, it's not going to be as fluffy and light and aerated. So you want to watch for that because they will get a little compact and it's harder for the roots to push and fill out your seed block. Slide 9 is fertility. This is a giant. I should have saved more time. I'm just realizing I'm running out of time. Mycorrhizal fungi is really, really important thing. It's the little white fungal strands. It's a beneficial relationship between roots and plant. You want to have mycorrhizal fungi on your plants. If you can find an inoculant, I would highly suggest putting that in with your seedlings from the start. If not, I really suggest putting it in when you're transplanting. It's the test they're doing with inoculating with mycorrhizal fungi or not is a 17% increase at minimum if you put that in when you transplant. And those fungal strands, they will attach to the roots, they'll attach to roots of another plant, of trees, and then they have this symbiotic relationship where they'll take nutrients from over here and move it through their tubes. So fungus under a microscope is a hollow tube, and it moves nutrients. The largest single-celled organism in the world is out in Oregon, and it's like 2,200 hectares of land. And they found that if there's a selenium deficiency, boron deficiency, calcium, whatever, in one part of the forest, it moves it through these fungal strands. It's a highly advanced organism it's almost a sentient being, and it will move those nutrients to where it needs to go in the forest, like, you know, kilometers if it needs to. And it's like the internet, they just all grab onto each other, and it's absolutely amazing. And there's a different mycorrhizal fungi is the one that is the beneficial that works into the roots. And then there's saprophytic fungi, and that fungi is the stuff you find in your compost that's doing the composition. So that's the link between the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom, is the fungi. And that's how the earth started. Fungus broke down rocks that created soil and all that kind of stuff. I will do compost teas. I aerate my compost teas. So I'll take compost and maybe some forest soil. I'll put it in a bag that's permeable, a grain sack that's a woven poly. I'll stick that in a barrel. I'll put water in that. And I use this. You don't have to do this. You can just stir it and mix it for a few days, for a week. And then I'll just let that bag soak in there, steep it like a tea, and then you can put it on your plants. If you use aeration, that's the best. I just get an aquarium pump with some air hoses. It goes underneath the bag, put the bag on top of the air hoses, fill it with water, plug the pump in. 18 to 24 hours is what I let it aerate and brew for, because after that, the fungus can die, and or you create too acidic a product to go in the soil that's not going to be feeding the microorganisms in the soil for them to benefit. It sets them back a little bit. You're still going to get the nutrients because they're water soluble, but the beautiful thing about that fungus, when you put it in and inoculate, and you can find just myco inoculant, look up that on the internet and you'll find it. But the fungus grabs onto whatever nutrients are there, the clay, and it chelates it. So it brings it in, and then it extracts it and leaves it behind in a readily available form for your plants to uptake. So clay soil, that questionable clay soil, I have seen a farm in Thailand that was the worst, most marginal concrete-like soil given to these monks by the Thai government, and they made it into the most productive soil in the country because they inoculated it. They didn't disturb the soil. They got all that mycorrhizal fungi and everything going, and it just breaks up that clay. And there's so much nutrients in clay. When you send a soil sample away, it's only what's water soluble, but you have so much nutrients in clay, more than you ever need. It's just about binding that. And mycelium and these mushrooms will break apart hydrogen carbon bonds. They'll break apart if you soak a soil in gasoline and then inoculate it with like common oyster mushrooms. It will break apart those things. And it's absolutely integral. The other things I'll use for fertility, fish emulsion. That doesn't help feed your soil organisms. Fish hydrosylate is better because that's just, they take the fillets of the meat off, and then you have all the other things. Like fish emulsion is they press all the leftover stuff, and they put, that's what you get your omega oils and stuff and other products. Fish hydrosylate feeds the soil organisms. I use seaweed extracts too. And I do like a homeopathic approach where I will only do it every 2 weeks, and I don't go heavy. I just make sure it's there going into the soil. Worm castings are absolutely probably the best thing you can put in because they're 60% humus, and it just keeps the moisture, the retention, and everything about having that vermicompost and or those mycorrhizal fungus in your soil is going to make for a bigger, stronger, better plant that will have nutrients available to it just by and it kind of blows soil pH out of the water because it will just create the conditions it needs. So pH is a real one that's been flipped on its head as far as soil food biology. So in a handful of soil, there's like 6 billion microorganisms happening. Transplanting is our last one. Trellising to maximize your garden. There's such a thing as transplanting shock. So know what your dates are and what your plants can do. So like onions and cabbage and kale and Swiss chard, I can get those out a lot earlier in the spring. Your hot crops, that are sensitive, you don't want to be putting them out much before May to 2-4 unless it's a real hot spell coming, and you know that. And the more you can trellis up, if you're in small spaces, find out what you can trellis and maximize your garden space like that. You can do a lot of companion planting and interplanting at different stages. If you've got tomatoes that you put in, you can put like if you're going to be pruning and trellising and suckering, and so you just have one growth point, you can put Swiss chard or lettuce greens and stuff underneath that. Brassicas, you got to look into companion planting. Brassicas and nightshades don't work well together. So you got to kind of look at that stuff. The one thing I should say, getting back to the lights, if you're not using a full spectrum light, you'll get what they call sun scald. So before you're going to put your seedlings out, you have to harden them off. So you have to put them out when it's going to be like temperatures of like 7 degrees is really great overnight. So that seedlings get some wind on them and they get a little bit of cold. And I do that for at least 2 days before I'm going to transplant anything out. And then they're hardened off and they're ready to go in. Otherwise, they'll flop over and they'll suffer from transplant shock and they won't do anything for like sometimes a couple of weeks before they get their footing and their roots in. It's a good time to put in that mycorrhizal fungi inoculant or fish emulsion or whatever to reduce the transplant shock when you're putting stuff in. Basically, most things you just want to bury transplant right up to where it's naturally coming out of your seedling tray. So there's a few things that you can go an inch deeper on, like broccoli and or Brussels sprouts. But generally, if you just put it right exactly how it is, that's a good thing to do when you're transplanting. So with the sun scalding on those lights that aren't full spectrum, you put them outside to harden them off. And if they get too much sun, then they're going to get this white look to them where they just get sunburnt. And so I'll do it for maybe 4 or 5 hours the first day, and then I'll just increase it every day by 2 hours until, and I've had plants that have gone out, completely got sun scalded, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just lost like hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars of potential. They do rebound. Plants are pretty tough, but sun scalding, look that up, and you just got to gradually introduce them to the sun. I'm going to stop talking now. I hope that you can double and triple crop too, depending on what, if it's a 28-day, a 50-day plant, whatever. Feel free to take stuff out as long as you're adding enough nutrient back in, and or if you have that mycorrhizal fungi, it's great. I will take out and stuff and just cut it just underground so that there's no light happening, so then you don't get any regrowth. And that mycorrhizal fungi is going to live on that whole root system as it decays. And as soon as you put another transplant in, it's going to migrate. That mycorrhizal fungus is going to migrate to those roots and inoculate it, and then get a nice big healthy thing.
Kevin, wow. I don't think an hour is really enough for you to convey even, you know, a drop of your knowledge that you've acquired over the years. So thank you. That's great. We are going to quickly run through some questions. So we're not going to take any more questions because we only have a couple minutes, and unfortunately we have another workshop in half an hour, so we can't stay really long. So Kevin, it's going to be a very like quick, you're on the spot here for questions. All right. Sure. So the first question is, how is Ombre, I'm not sure if I'm saying that properly, the soil company you mentioned, spelt? Maybe you can.
I use Fafard. Oh, Omri. OMRI. It's just kind of a certification, meaning that there's no harsh chemicals or residuals and that kind of stuff. So Omri certified products, if a company pays for that, they can get Omri certified. And generally, most of the organic standards have accepted Omri as acceptable amendments into the organic systems.
Maybe you can send us a link, and then when we do our follow-up email, we can include that. Would that be good, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm just typing it in here too.
Okay. Yeah. What do you think about peat pods?
Peat pods, I haven't used them. I mean, I try to use waste product of anything as much as I can. So we often get seedling trays donated to us. You can do like a 3% hydrogen peroxide solution and spray them in case there was any plant disease that was in them, residual, and you can clean them out. Yeah, I haven't really used the peat pods. I'm sure they're great and they retain moisture and works.
Okay, how do you feel about alpaca compost?
Yeah, it's that's one that's like I wouldn't want to put any animal manures or poops in my, like, it's generally 100 days or 120 days breakdown in the soil for you to not get any of those pathogens uptake. Alpaca is one of those ones you can put right in and almost plant in it and not worry about eating lettuce greens and getting sick. So yeah, it's totally fine. I mean, yeah, animal manures are great, especially when they're properly composted.
Do you risk mold with seeds in the freezer?
I have not found that, as long as there's no stratification happening, stratification being the, power goes out and they warm up and then cool and then warm and then cool. So I have not found any mold. Generally make sure everything's going in dry into seed packets or little Ziploc bags or whatever.
Okay. What do you do with the tarps with regards to not disturbing the soil?
The tarps?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people just throw a tarp down and for like 2 weeks. It's like, so if I'm not ready to plant, so if I say I harvest a bunch of radishes and I don't have my seedlings, they're not ready to go in yet, or something happened, then I just put the black plastic tarp down over top of that so that light doesn't get on it and make the weed seeds germinate. What you could do is leave it off, let all the weed seeds germinate, and then work them just slightly, or put the tarp back on them at that point. And it's really a simple way to not have to till the soil, because it just stops all that germination and all that to happen. And even on like 40 degrees, like it was so hot last summer, and I put these black tarps down, and I'm like, man, I'm just cooking the soil. I would lift it up in the middle of the day, and there's centipedes and everything crawling right up to the surface that didn't seem to be bothered, because, right down underneath that soil, it's back to cool. And if they have all that airways and stuff to go up and down, they're just going to go down there and hang out and come up when they need to. But it was amazing how much life was happening right at the surface, even in that hot.
If you don't disturb the soil, doesn't it get super compact and inhibit root growth?
It can. If you got that fungus happening, there's no worry about that. That's why I use that broad fork thing. Or you can just have a shovel or a pitchfork, jump on it and just wiggle. So you've made a little bit you've broken up the soil, but not broke it. Like when you rototill, you kill all those fungal strands and everything. It takes so long for them to come back. It's just about aerating. So yeah, you can just use a shovel, a pitchfork, a broad fork, whatever you got, just to make sure that there's oxygen. So things aren't anaerobic, meaning they have access to oxygen.
Okay. My garden has grass growing in it, and I have to get rid of it by digging deeper. How do I do that?
Real easy way. You can do the double dig and flip it, and so you got it, and then never disturb it again. You can just simply steal the light from it by putting the tarp down, and then wait 2-3 weeks, and then just kind of till it like that, and then tarp it again. Like sometimes if I have a really weedy bed, I'll let the weeds come up, or the grass or whatever, and then I'll just till it a little bit, throw the tarp over it, and then take it off, let things come back to see if they're still intact and alive, and then just break it down a little bit more. It's a good way to go. Or the cardboard on the other thing is you can just flip it a little bit and then put cardboard down, and then throw soil from the sides of your bed. If you're making a raised bed, I throw that on top, but that cardboard generally will stop it too.
Okay. Does the advice about not disturbing soil and fungal activity apply in raised beds as well?
Absolutely. Like, honestly, the soil food web, I say nerds, but like in no derogatory way, but the people that are really nerding out and really getting into deep, this soil food biology stuff and soil sciences, just at places we never thought it would go. It used to be like the big MPK and all that, but now we know that if I send my soil test away, it's just whatever's soluble in water is going to come back, but there's so much nutrients in there. So the general consensus is do not disturb your soil. If you don't have to, do not do it. Just a little bit, again, like just putting in that broad fork, pitchfork, whatever, and loosening it so that air can get down is all you have to do.
Okay. With the plate method for germinating pepper seeds, how long does it take for seeds to sprout?
It depends. Generally, I would say anywhere between 3 to 2 weeks. It depends on what it is, really. Some seeds just take longer, but if you have optimum optimum temperatures with it, I mean, it's generally a week. You'll start to see some growth. I just keep things moist. You have to keep things moist.
Does the paper towel need to be on a plate, or can you put the paper towel directly on the heat mat?
I do plate, paper towel, seeds, another paper towel, water it so it's nice and moist and to the touch, and then I put the other plate on top. So if you pick up your plate that's on that heating pad and it feels too hot, then it's too hot. So maybe I would put like another little plate underneath that to give it a little air pocket, or a towel over top of your heating pad. So
I think what they're asking is what function does the plates, why are the plates there?
Oh, it's just, yeah, to put my seeds on. I mean, really. And it's just, yeah, we all have plates kicking
It
around.
helps holds the moisture a bit, right? If you put that paper towel right on the heat mat, you're gonna lose your moisture too quick, right?
Yeah, and you don't want this heat, you don't want your seeds sitting on an actual heat source generally. So it's just, there's a little bit of a buffer there, so it's not going to heat things up too much.
Okay. Do you sell seedlings at your farm? If so, when will you start the sales, and what kind of seedlings will be available?
We're starting seedlings probably in 2 weeks. Some of the early stuff like leeks and that will get going, and celery root. And yes, we do have lots of seedlings, and we'll be putting up we have an online store. It's really great. Amy's here has been taking care of that, and it worked really well last year. So you can just order seedlings of all sorts, herbs, and yeah, all kinds of things. We have like
if Amy's listening, if you have that link, you could probably pop it into our chat if you want to do that now. Amy, I don't know if you're hearing that.
Yep, she's got that.
Perfect. I bought seeds from Vessies. Well, they say vessels, but I'm thinking they're saying Vessies.
Sure.
And they had treated or not treated. Have you tried both of these? What works best?
I'm untreated because, yeah, sometimes they'll say pelleted, which just means that they put a little coating on it, and a lot of the pelleting will be OMRI certified again, so it's organic, and it's just so that if you're going through a seeder, so a walk behind seeder, they'll, on the really small seeds, they'll put a pellet so you don't bleed the seed out. So when you're seeding, you don't get like 7 seeds in one little spot, and it'll just make the seeds bigger so it drops less.
Okay. Are mycorrhizae specific to species?
So 80% of plants have mycorrhizal fungus on them. So what you can do, I would just look it up. You know what? I'm gonna put a website in there now into the thing, and like check it out and just learn as much as you can about fungus. It is the answer.
Is there a brand of inoculant you recommend?
Check out that website. No, it's largely ungoverned right now. There's nobody looking over it, but just find something. They do a little bit of research and find a company that's been around for a while, and then just inoculate a couple of seedlings, or like, if you have a pot like this, do one, and then when you pull it up, you'll see all that, and you can just take a hunk of that root off, and then just put it in all your other your tray of 52. So take a hunk like this and then just put a little bit in every single one when you fill up with the soil, and keep it moist. And then all of a sudden you've got more and more inoculant. You can just keep one thing going and keep on taking a little bit off and then putting it back in every one, and you'll just keep on spreading it.
All right, we've got 4 more questions. We're going to run through them really quick.
Sure.
All right. Somebody wants you to repeat which veggies can be pruned to stay smaller and more bush-like.
Definitely peppers, eggplants, okra. What else have we got? Like when you do tomatoes and that, you trellis them and you can kind of manipulate them, but you don't want them to go bushy, as opposed to you want 1 liter. So 1 stalk going up, giving you production. So that's how they do with cucumbers and tomatoes.
Okay. And where do you buy your inoculant?
You know what? I haven't been using it too much, but generally the seed houses. So like William Dam will have stuff for sure. Yeah, I mean, of course, Amazon. I don't recommend helping those billionaires get any more billionaire, but anyways.
Do you fan your seedlings while indoors under the lights?
I do. Air movement's great. Yeah, if things are stagnant, then that's when you get into problems. So yeah, having a little bit of airflow is always a good idea for sure.
All right, wonderful. Last question. How much of your crop is eaten by animals?
Ooh, depends. If I lost like tens of thousands of dollars a few years back from deer and that, you can put up some fencing, you can put on like hot pepper spray and stuff like that. And yes, don't shop Amazon. I like that, Garrett. Yeah, it depends. So the more nutrition you have in your soil, the more that mycorrhizal and all that, it will create a condition in your plant for the right pH. When I see bugs preying on plants, it's a nutrient deficiency. If you have a healthy plant, the bugs, like the plant gives off an infrared at night that the bugs see, and they come in and they attack those plants that are sickly or suffering. They don't attack the healthy plants. So if you have the right pH, about 6.8, they cannot metabolize medical or scientific terms. They cannot metabolize the plant. So yeah, they don't have pancreases, insects.
Okay, all right. Kevin, that was wonderful. Thank you everyone for joining us. We're going to be sending out a follow-up email, and please visit Mcquesten Farms, because look at all the information these people have. They know what they're doing out there. I think we're going to have a final word from Sheila, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Just really quick before, if anybody ever wants to, you can get a hold of Mcquesten Urban Farm, and they can have my contact info. I can do consulting and that kind of stuff on the side as well. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And thanks for everybody for organizing this and for coming out and listening.
Yeah, no, just doing what Kelly said. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much for Kevin and Mcquesten Urban Farm for blessing us with your knowledge. We will be hearing from Mcquesten Urban Farm again next week, so don't miss that. And again, we will send a follow-up email, and this session has been recorded, so you'll be able to listen back. Thanks so much.
Welcome.